begin, Lynn. Some more folks may be coming in, but we don't want to go too late. So,
Okay. All right. So, okay, so I'll begin. Welcome, everyone. Today's event will celebrate the launch of a collection of poems, The Elk and the Glade by Bruce E. Whitacre, just released from Crown Rock Media. Bruce will read some of the poems from his new collection, but first we'll have a panel discussion with our special guests. And those special guests are the artist, Patty Scarborough, a renowned landscape painter living in Nebraska, Claudia Fitch, a very unique public works artist, and Crystal Werger, the director of the Dawson County Historical Society Museum in Lexington, Nebraska. Then we'll close with a Q&A. So keep your questions in mind as we're moving through the program. I'm just going to go through a few logistical things right now quickly. You probably know this. I know you're very Zoom savvy, I'm sure by now, but you can watch the program in gallery view yourself, or you can click in the upper right-hand corner, the word it says view. You can click on that and you can choose speaker view if you just want to see the speaker when they're talking. So that's up to you. We're going to let everyone decide themselves how they want to do that rather than spotlight the speakers. You can please stay on mute until the end of the program when we have the Q&A. You should know that this event is being recorded. You are welcome to turn off your video if you don't want to be recorded. Only the speaker content, not all of our hey, how you doing? Like all that in the very beginning, that won't be on the recording. You'll be able to find the recorded event at the Crown Rock Media website. And we will post the, let me just pop up my chat column. We will post the link to that in the chat column. Keep an eye on the chat column on the right, because we're going to post people's longer bios that we're not going to read, verbatim, but we will post that, links to by the Elk and the Glade, links to the museum, all kinds of things like that. So just keep an eye on the chat column, and you're welcome to post in the chat column as well if you want to, just comment on something, or how people are at poetry readings, they get very emotional. So there's also going to be a photo gallery on the Crown Rock Media website to the work of Jenny Hicks, and a purchase link for the Elk and the Glade. So that's all of the official stuff. I'd like to start today's program by telling you a little bit more about the Elk and the Glade. The poems, here's the book. I have the book right here. Whoop, can't see it. There we go. Okay. The poems chronicle the life and career of painter Jenny Fitch Hicks. Fitch is actually her maiden name, who is the great-grandmother of our poet tonight, Bruce Whitacre. Jenny Hicks looms large in the family lore. Whoa, hold on a second. Okay. In the family lore that Bruce grew up with, much of the stories happened, that he recounts in his poems, happened in the High Line, a string of towns along Highway 23 in Southwest Nebraska. What pulls me personally into the work, besides the beautiful small moments that resonate off the page, is the story of a woman who didn't have the option of an arts education, but who dared to be an artist, to find people to take lessons from, and who imagined worlds that extended beyond the prairie to other continents and ways of being. She was inspired by calendar images, postcards, magazines, and she sold her work to the farmers and neighbors in the small towns around her. Jenny Fitch Hicks was born in Ohio in 1879 and moved to a sod house. And let me just stop for Bruce, a sod house made of mud. I mean, is that what that means?
Well, the grass holds it together. So it's like big bricks. And so it stacks up kind of like an adobe style.
Yeah.
And it's perfect for that climate and weather, except that it's very fragile. So most people lived in them for the first many years, several years. And then in this case, as the railroad came out and they could bring wood, then they finally built wood houses. But if you've ever laid a lawn in sod, you just imagine stacking those up into a wall. It is pretty firm.
Okay. Well, It sounds wonderful. Okay. A sod house in Farnham, Nebraska in 1885. And, they dug their own well, grew their own food, made their own clothes. After visiting Ohio as a young woman, Jenny returned to Nebraska where she raised a family and lost her husband in the 1930s in a farming accident. At that point, she returned to painting and created over 1,500 mostly landscape paintings, which she sold from her home in Farnham, Nebraska. She died at the age of 98 in 1977. I also want to tell you that some good news, The Elk and the Glade by Bruce Whitacre is a Publisher's Weekly editor's pick, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other platforms. Also, I want to make sure you know that if you contribute to the Dawson County Historical Society Museum, which will feature the work of Jenny Hicks in February, in an amount over $50, you get a free copy of the book. So that's a nice, a nice little perk. That's very generous of the museum. I'm going to read a poem now. I'm not going to do the reading. I'm just going to read one poem, then we're going to go into our panel. But I'm going to read one poem from The Elk and the Glade. It's one of my favorites. I think it's the first one that I read from that series. Bruce might have showed me this poem as early as 2018. We were trying to remember, although I think he pulled the book together pretty fast, honestly. Christmas Oranges. The children were not to watch as father unloaded the snow-capped wagon. Crates and bushels went straight to the cellar and under an Indian blanket. Father pocketed the key with a wink. Jenny had to sit to keep breathing, her hands trembling as she cracked the walnuts. That evening, candles clipped to the fir were lit. They mean the fir tree, F-I-R. Their dots of light graced the gingham bows, the popcorn strings, and cast dark shadows in the parlor corners. Atop the white tablecloth brought from Ohio, turkey with stuffing, yams, and fruit pies crowded the table, so everyone ate standing or in the parlor. Mother fanned herself at the fire, exhausted, while Nora, the hired girl, hovered, hiding homesick tears. Family and neighbors joined in rolling up the rugs. Then with fiddles and dancing, Jenny missed the beat. And I just want to say, I love that line. Of course she missed the beat. She's an artist. She's a little off. You know what I mean?
Logging in the Bruce's thing so you can see that we are actually.
Okay. Stepping to the window, she gazed through the frosted panes. Stars arched over the prairie. Horses stomped under the blanket. Father called her into the kitchen. There we go. Father called her into the kitchen. I want you to see these first, Jenny. Remember? His carpenter's hands, deft and hard, pried a crate open. Golden spheres burned into view, sweet and strange. Oranges, she cried. Father laughed. They made the last train. She remembered from last year to peel them first. The flesh exploded in her mouth. Ocean, green, warm, sunshine. She closed her eyes and swallowed. Not here in one taste. She carried a bowlful into the parlor. The music stopped. The dancers paused. She beamed as everyone surrounded her, each reaching for an orange, the only ones any of them would eat that year. The night froze in her memory like crystals on the panes, melting into a tale from time to time, like now for me, then freezing again for the next blue hour. I love that poem. It's one of my favorites in the Elk and the Glade. And we posted a book purchase link and a link to donate to the museum in the chat column. We're going to move into our next part of the program now, the panel discussion. So let me just introduce the panelists. Their more complete bios are in the chat column. Patty Scarborough is a landscape painter. She lives in Nebraska. She earned a degree in fine arts from Kearney State College, and she remains deeply connected to the Nebraska landscape. I just discovered her work. It has a great vibe. I think you'd be very interested in it. She says that her attraction has always been to the way contours and form interact with color and context. Her subjects include not only the skies that stretch over her home state, Nebraska, but also the small clustered spaces below. Claudia Fitch is a Seattle-based artist who lived and worked in New York City for 10 years, where her painting evolved into shadow boxes, sculpture installations, and public art. Her work is really unusual. We were just looking at her website before everyone came. There are like these giant heads that are 6 feet tall, and it's very interesting public work. She's now based in Seattle. Crystal Werger is the director of the Dawson County Historical Society Museum in Lexington, Nebraska. And I want to mention again that in February 2023, the museum will feature an exhibition of the work of Jenny Hicks. Crystal Werger speaks widely on history and preservation, and she's served on committees including the Nebraska State Historic Preservation Review Board. God, all of these have the longest names. These organizations, and their long bios are in the. So now I'd like to invite Patty, Crystal, and Claudia to kick off our panel segment by responding to the poem that I just read, Christmas Oranges, and to share their connection to the work of Jenny Hicks and the poems, and how the life of Jenny Hicks and any of those things relates to their own life's work and their own art. So take it away, Patty, Crystal, and Claudia.
I must say, if I can start, I must say, when you posted the image of Jenny painting in the kitchen, that just struck home, because I used to paint in the laundry room, and my easel was set up by the pile of shoes of the kids, and the dog food dish and the washer and the dryer were humming. So that was a very familiar feeling to me, that when you don't have a huge studio or a place to go, you set up where you can if the need to paint becomes that great. I love that photograph. I think that's one of the ways that Jenny and I are probably very much alike. I mean, my life has been so much easier. She had so many more burdens than I did, but I think we both were born perhaps with that need to try to filter the physical world through our own hands and paint, and to create a world of our own that showed not only the physical manifestations, but as Bruce shares in some of his poetry, the smells and the aromas and the feelings that you would experience if you had been in the places that she was painting. Mm-hmm. I'm very lucky to have been very different in that I have got a college education. My folks lived in town. They were college educated, so we had many advantages. And of course, I can order materials and have them at my doorstep in 2 days. That's lovely. I think mostly it is that desire to create, even through the ups and downs of your life, the kids and the family, and then got to go to school and got to go out and get the crops and life in general, and that you don't often get to start your heart work until you have that space in the kitchen or the laundry room, and that is all yours, that you can do your work in. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I have a whole studio now.
That's good. Claudia, can you relate to what Patty is saying?
Yes, I also had the privilege of a college.
Whoops, I think her video just froze.
And the family that really immersed themselves in certainly in music and in art, and as well as all sorts of other interests. So I think what I think when I had graduated, I made sure I somehow, by hook or by crook, got a studio, and just have managed to stay with it, just having a real passion for it. I think the story, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Bruce for his poems, for really filling in a picture of life in Nebraska, Jenny's life, but the surrounding kind of environment of that life. And, you know, I really didn't get to hear much about it, just a few snippets of here and there from my dad. Um, and so I, I understand from him that she was just a lot of fun to hang out with, but she had a chance to do. So I understand that she was really very funny. And I would say that in my experience of being an artist and being around other artists, humor is just hugely important. And the vicissitudes of, you know, the ups and downs of trying to maintain a practice no matter what. You know, I kind of understood from Dad that she just really had a great attitude about all that and a great sense of humor. I'm not directly answering what you were saying, Patty, but I just, I know that for me, making art was kind of is a way of sort of keeping one's sanity, as well as being a real source of joy sometimes a great source of frustration. But I think the one other thing about Jenny's collection of stories, of postcards and calendar images and things cut out of magazines. It's the same with me. I have thousands of images. I have files. I have folders. I have just a massive amount of photos that I've collected from the internet that I keep with me. They're in a way a kind of diary of what I was thinking about maybe 10 years ago. I get reminded, oh, geez, that's still a good idea. I should make some art from that. But I do think that Jenny was a marvelous had a marvelous way of using an image and assembling all the things that she wanted in her painting to create kind of a wonderful sort of dream state, you know, based on memory. And I would say that is where I most identify with her work.
That's a perfect phrase, I think, dream state. And, you know, I wanted to ask Crystal if she could, and thank you for sharing all of that. It's really interesting that you have so many images, Claudia, that you've saved and that you share that with Jenny. And I think what you said, Patty, about having to have the space, you know, is, you know, obviously so important for women and so hard to do when your families are young, and, you know, it's so hard to do at that time in your life. I was going to ask Crystal if you could situate the work of Jenny Fitch in Nebraska, the Nebraska, you know, art that comes out of that part of the country, and maybe in that time. You know, she died in 1977. She was 98 years old. So she was painting, you know, in the early to mid part and late part of the of the 20th century. Can you help us like situate her work in some way, in a regional or national, or I don't know.
You know, the thing about Jenny that I've learned just from talking to Bruce and reading through the material that I have, looking through her pictures, you know, I'm not an artist myself. I can't paint, I can't draw, I can't do anything, but I love art. And I love looking at art. And I truly feel that you can learn about a person, about the artist through, you know, what they painted or what they drew, or what they sculpted. And as for putting her someplace in the whole scheme of artists, you know, in Nebraska, the time period is, I don't know how I would do that, because when I think about her art, it's more, it's not where it fits. It's more like I think about the person. And so like when we show our art in our gallery, and being a historical museum as well, and being a county historical museum, I think about how she fits in our timeline of our county. And what's most interesting to me is that she was a pioneer, and that she came to our county when there was nothing. You know, like Bruce said, they lived in a sod house. That's not fun or pleasant. It's hard. It's very hard. And they had to travel so far, and life was hard for her. And doubly so because she was a woman. And then as she goes into womanhood and she's painting, and she has 3 children, and she loses her husband early on, yet she still continues to paint, is just amazing. And it was her escape. It's like we all talk about going home from work and decompressing, and that was her way to decompress. And her art is so beautiful, but I love thinking about her art, and along with Bruce's poetry, it just really brings it alive. And she just, that I can't even put it into words. It's so moving. And the way she painted things that were not from around here, you know, a lot of us now, we can escape, we can go on vacations, we can get away. She couldn't. And she was needed here. And I'm so excited to display her art, because not only do we have relatives of hers here, you know, Jan Whiteman, who's on my board, but she is a woman painter, painted 30s, 40s. Bruce, how long did she paint? Up until the 70s?
Up until the early 70s, just mostly kind of tapered off 69 and in 70. Yeah.
Okay, so you can see in her paintings, you know, the early on and how she grew. And it really, her art is displaying a time period in Dawson County's history. A woman painter in Dawson County from Farnham, which is a really small community in Dawson County, south. It's a community that we have a hard time portraying in our county museum. We just don't have a lot of stuff from Farnham. So I am floored to have this woman and have her art in our museum. And then it's a piece of history we don't get to show very often. And I can't express enough how excited I am, because it's exciting for me, but I think it's going to be exciting for our viewers as well, our visitors to the museum, as well as like our community of people that come to the museum often, to see this art that nobody knew about, except for maybe some of her family members. And I can't wait to see how people connect with it, how they will look at it, how they will read Bruce's poems, how they will look at her art, and they will see her history, because that's something we have to display as well. You know, the history of the woman, her life, what was it like? Exactly what you said, Lynn, at the beginning, how you were talking about it. That poem, just really how life was when she was growing up in the early 1900s. I love to see that connection that people make.
Yeah, I wonder where she even got her art supplies.
And how long it took to get them.
Yeah, or it would have been a trip into North Platte, maybe.
They must have come by train, right? They must have come by train.
Yep.
I think there's, you know, I keep thinking of Emily Dickinson. You know, I just think of like a woman who kind of is like quietly, and only her family is really aware. Her family's her only audience, is cranking out work, so much work in privacy, you know, in the privacy of her room. And yeah, and her parents were not educated, right? I know she didn't have an art education, although she did take lessons.
Yes, but I believe that Arthur's family were, and Arthur, if I'm trying to read,
Okay.
were the school children there? I don't know, but I do know that both Catherine and Helen, his sisters, Helen, is my grandmother, did have college education and did pursue literature and pursued music. Certainly my grandmother did. So, you know, I think there was that atmosphere. And in Farnham, I'm not sure, but there were music competitions that probably extended beyond Farnham. But I think there was an awareness of culture that maybe is not so evident, not necessarily in the visual arts, because that takes money, that takes materials, that takes time and place, that time and space to create, that is not quite, you know, one can make music maybe with a little more minimal means, certainly a lot of time to practice, but you know, it's just, I think there was an atmosphere of culture, and maybe other members of our audience here can add to that.
Do you think she was aware of like Frederick Church and Thomas Cole and the New York, because painters of that time that were painting in the Hudson Valley? Because when you're taught, you know, when you said the dreamlike quality to her paintings, they have that same Hudson Valley school kind of dreamlike landscape, you know, like, and I just was wondering if she would have been aware of them.
I don't know. She may well have been. I think her force of imagination really forged a lot. Even though she was copying, there was just some very visceral sense to how she put things together, and a real darn good sense of composition. And some of those paintings are stunners for me. I don't know, because I'm not sure how much information, you know, I'm not sure how much from New York arrived in the Midwest. The Midwest did have cultural centers on par with other major cities, you know, Chicago, and even in Ohio, there's Cincinnati and God, my brain is not going, but Cleveland were certainly big art centers, and just how any of that maybe filtered down through the Midwest, I don't know. But when I was going to school, Cleveland Art Institute was a pretty big deal. So, you know, I think there is maybe a lot more floating around in the environment.
I do, just to
Again,
give you
we've
an
seen
idea
everything.
here, I got some of Arthur's books have come down to me. And a lot of the late 19th century classics, Quo Vadis, Looking Backward, he had a complete set of Shakespeare. He really was very bookish, but those books at that time were like reading contemporary politics. Looking Backward was a very important political book at that time about the union movement. So there was a lot of connectivity. And remember also, people had just settled from places like Chicago, Ohio, whatever. So there was that, they still wanted their papers. They still wanted, you know, the things that they had brought with them. And once the trains came through, which was just after they arrived, their connectivity was pretty good. Arthur would sell his cattle in Omaha and stay in a hotel. And, you know, he had an urban connection in that way, but he'd take the train down to Omaha. So there was a lot of back and forth. And the girls went to high school mostly in Kearney, which was a college town. And so there was, I think there were a lot of images and things around that they could be connected to.
Okay, I think given the time, and Bruce will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's time to move on to the next part of our program. Okay. I want to really thank Patty and Crystal and Claudia for sharing what you did. Thank you so much. It's very inspiring. I'm going to introduce Bruce now, and he's going to read some of his poems. I know many of you know Bruce. I think there are a number of you who are related to him who are in the audience. So have known him. His debate partner from high school is here, you know, so for about 10 years, I co-hosted a reading series in Soho in the East Village that Bruce would attend regularly, as other people actually in the audience today did. And he would often read in the open mic, and I was always impressed with the maturity of his poems. And what I mean by that is I knew that he was a new poet, but his work sounded like it had been really well edited, and it was very interesting. Bruce also has a background in playwriting, and we've talked about the overlap in skills between playwriting and poetry. I think this benefits his facility with storytelling and his sense of narrative structure and his development of characters through vivid details and so on. So you're going to hear some of that in the poems. I think you're going to really enjoy this reading collected from the collection, the new collection, The Elk and the Glade, which is of course one of the beautiful paintings by Jenny Hicks. It's his first collection of poems. So please welcome Bruce Whitacre.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, everyone. I want to also thank Claudia, Crystal, and Patty for being part of our event and for all you're doing to further the work of the arts in America and in Nebraska. I want to also thank Kent and Mark and their wives and families for allowing me to use some of the pictures in the book. And shout out to the members of the Dawson County Historical Society Museum family who were here. It is important we support the museum. This is Lexington's big fundraising day. The button to contribute to the museum is in the chat. So this book started, the first poem was Christmas Oranges. And Lynn, I want to thank you not only for being really wonderful in hosting us tonight, but you are also the driver who said you should really go back and look at this in more detail and follow up on these poems about your grandmother. So I did. And so they slowly came together. And at the same time, I was having conversations with the Nebraska Museum, the Museum of Nebraska Art, who eventually turned me on to Crystal. And so the show actually started coming into view. So what I wanted to do tonight is go through a couple things, starting with one of my great fortunes was having young parents and grandparents, so that Jenny and I shared 21 years on this earth. As a boy, seeing her painting, hearing her stories, visiting her small white house were all exciting experiences. So the book begins with Jenny in that time, which is kind of her late 70s. So the first poem in the book is Small White House in the Small Town, and it kind of gives an overview of her life. Small white house in the small town. Small white house in the small town on the High Line. Jenny tells how Horace, her father, dug the first well. They came out from Ohio betting on hope. Because father was a carpenter, the soddy had rare wood-framed windows battered hard in '88. Blizzards were a fact of life in Farnham, Moorfield, Curtis, Maywood, and beyond, the small towns of the High Line. Left her heart back in Ohio, first her favorite brother, then a lover. Returned to Nebraska, the High Line, married old and had 3 girls, Esther, Dorothy, and Ruth. But it was Ohio where she learned to paint oil. Painted everything that was not High Line. Purple mountains, blue lakes, green trees, elk, lions, sailboats, stones, cottages nestled, copied from calendars, postcards, and magazines that sold for a few dollars to view starved farmers and their wives on the brown prairies. She doesn't tell how husband killed, farming, not even 60, just as he got off his knees from 29. After one farm gone, him dead, last farm sold, she moved into the small white house in the small town. A house too cold for winter, so she migrated among those daughters and their silent husbands. Couldn't wait to return across the High Line, home to the small white house in the small town each spring and open the studio in the pantry. Smock and paint tubes, canvases, the smell of baking bread and turpentine, a dwindling paradise as friends die off, dumping mountain autumn ashes on the daffodils, daughters getting older, son-in-laws suffer her still. Home is the small white house in the small town. Paintings hung in homes across the land, a Nebraska Grandma Moses telling tales to children, now almost deaf to their voices. She gazes out the south window. Her brown eyes assay the light. Sun sets and splits on the blade of the High Line. Farnham, Moorfield, Curtis, Maywood, and beyond, the small house in the white town. So from there, drawing on this and other memories, the book retraces life from her early childhood in Ohio, her first memory being carried in a white crib to an aunt of her mother's after her death, and then later her journey as a pioneer to Nebraska. Christmas Oranges was from a story she told me about their family holidays, and she was always proud that despite the Nebraska weather, the family always gathered for these holidays. I want to jump forward to Jenny's early years, and one of my favorite characters in the book are her mother-in-law, Catherine Hicks. This is the poem is called The Elk in the Glade, and it takes place after Jenny returned from Cleveland and first started painting in oils. Arthur Hicks would, of course, become her husband. Catherine Whitacre's ancestry, by the way, is spelled with a K, not a C, so that's not where my name directly comes from. So this is the first part of The Elk in the Glade. Arthur was the son of an odd couple, a wounded Civil War veteran, Horatio, who had been languishing in a DC hospital when Lincoln was shot, and Catherine, the belle of a defunct Philadelphia fortune. Her mother's father, Ribka, had come from Austria with a command of machine looms. He built a cotton mill in the 1830s and got rich. His daughter married into the Whitacres, descendants of British deserters who chopped wood for a living, but in 2 generations, a Whitacre daughter had married the governor of Pennsylvania. All this glamour ended for Catherine's family with the Civil War. Cotton was embargoed and the mill was closed, the family ruined. They melted their last silver dollars into spoons emblazoned with the initial R for Ribka, which Catherine carried in her portmanteau all the way to the High Line. Catherine and Horatio were sent west by her doctors. The air might do her good. The land officer seemed not to blink when a man who could barely walk filed a homestead claim. The move excited Horatio, who was eager to leave behind stuffy Philadelphia with its aftermath of bankruptcy. Catherine, a proper, demanding, sharp-tongued snob, set an elevated tone for the whole family. No sod house for her. She let Arthur stay indoors and read his books while blizzards howled outside their proper frame house. Her mother's porcelain teacups lined the top shelf, a constant dusting hazard to the succession of Irish hired girls. Catherine's low opinion of Highland girls had kept Arthur single longer than Horatio thought proper. Arthur taught country school and in summer farmed Horatio's homestead for them. He drove a 4-wheeled trap and kept to himself. Catherine needed a new dress for the GAR picnic, Grand Army of the Republic. She hated this sentimental, sometimes boozy gathering of veterans, but her garrulous Horatio thrived on company and the war had been his moment. Even she could not bear to withhold one of his few pleasures. Having heard good things, she called on Jenny, who pumped her singer at Maud's, where she boarded. Jenny was one of the few girls in town not afraid of Catherine, who reminded her of 1 or 2 hostesses she'd met in Cleveland. Her traveled eye and straightforward manner reassured Catherine. Jenny had been East. Jenny had taste. She recommended a narrow skirt, no petticoat. Catherine would think about it. She was about to leave when her eye caught a picture hanging over the sewing machine. It was an elk in a mountain glade, its majestic antlers pitched back, its mouth full open in a mating call. "Where did you get this, Jenny? It's lovely." Catherine's voice rang like a bell. "A friend gave it to me." "Really? Who? Someone in town?" Jenny blushed. I have to confess, ma'am, I painted it myself. I'm just dabbling on my own account." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Never sell yourself short, dear." So Jenny went on to marry Arthur. They had their family. And then we want to jump to a poem that I wrote to try to explain this issue of why Jenny never painted Nebraska landscapes, but rather painted these dreamscapes we were talking earlier. So this poem is called Pink. Jenny shuffles through the file of pictures she clips from calendars and magazines: a horse with a robin, a fly fisherman wading a river, a country road passing a stone cottage, 2 wolves howling in the night. They will each make a fine painting. She puts on an old shirt. She mixes colors on the palette: primary, white, turpentine. She chooses a fine brush to model the snow that caps the gray mountains at dawn: red, white, turpentine, a sip of coffee, and then she is back on a train with Arthur, that honeymoon morning in Colorado. The mountain ridge fades into distance, white and more white, paler, paler pink. It blushes the sky just enough. His lips on her hand, her surprise. She had never imagined such beauty, and here was Arthur, her reason, her witness. Another tunnel, and the view is gone. But she has captured it here once again, as she will hundreds of times over dozens of years, in the small white house in the small town, not quite alone. And then Brady, who I want to thank for his help with an early draft of this, had suggested I write what's called an ekphrastic poem, drawing from one of the paintings. And so, as I pointed out earlier, Kent has this picture called Pride at the Shore, which I think Lynn is going to share with us now. So while she's doing that, I'll go ahead and start. Pride at the shore, serene, water barely ripples as the she lion crouches to drink, watched over by her dark-maned king. Sublime setting sun glazes the rocky cliff behind them, lake ablaze in twilight, last light before the hunt. The picture of two lions painted by Jenny at the birth of my father, her first grandchild, floated with the river of the 7 houses in 17 years, my youth in one town, until it became home itself. The stalwart couple, lion and lioness, presided from rec room to bedroom to mantle when there was one, to orange glow, our constant hearth. They were the household deities, a portrait of our parents' marriage, a shrine to wild hearts in still moments. Hard to square their menace and power with the fragile farm wife who made them. I believe their claws raked something in her confined. Their paws slaked their own thirst, pauses in stop, and hours before the hunt. So that's the painting which will be in the show, and thank you again to Kent for showing it. Before I read my last poem for this evening, I wanted to also thank profoundly Roxanne Hoffman, who's here. She's going to be publishing my next book, which is called Good Housekeeping, but Roxanne has been my advisor, my guide through this whole publishing process, and this book would not have come together without you, Roxanne. Thank you. And Roxanne is a very important figure in New York and American poetry, so I'm really glad she could be with us tonight. So the last poem I'm going to read is a tribute to my Aunt Ruth, the youngest of Jenny's daughters, who was a champion storyteller, and almost like another grandmother to me. She had no children, and so we three and all of the kids in the family were kind of like grandchildren for her. So this, her story she told me was the kernel for this one, which is called The Neighbor with the Saber. He arrived in Farnham quietly and kept to himself, a skinny, cigar-smoking fellow with crystal blue eyes that never looked you square. No one knew if he'd bought or rented the old Russell place, but he seemed to know the working end of a plow okay. He managed for himself somehow, never hired a girl or anything. Sally Ricketts even saw him out hanging laundry one day. She laughed with a snort every time she told of it. Why, whoever thought a man would do that? Sally herself thought later how, of course, soldiers do their own wash. There were other clues. When no one had seen him for a few days, Bill Cleaver knocked on his door. He was met by a wheezing, sweaty ghost railing at him with a saber. His greasy hair long and scraggly as his beard. His gibberish was incomprehensible, but his eyes looked like he'd seen hell. People left him alone after that. Sheets blew in the wind for a while, but then his plow horse showed up at the Cleavers. Its ribs stuck out like jail bars across its side. It was the bawling of the unmilked cow that brought Bill Cleaver back to the paint-chipped porch. No answer to his knock, he walked in. He found him on the bed, hands folded across his belly, eyes fixed on a ceiling stain. A mouse or something had started in on his nose. But what struck Bill was that what he had on, the blue full-dress uniform of the 7th Cavalry, Custer's brigade of infamous repute, and his saber lay by his side, properly fastened to his belt. He wore his white gloves. Ready for his last stand, Bill later said. Was he a deserter, a survivor? They talked about it for years. Bill would never forget those gaping eyes as he gazed upon that full-dressed corpse. Those eyes had seen things, horses tumbling dead onto their riders, waking under a pile of bodies, knives circling skulls for the scalp, crawling away in the night, leaving carnage behind, but not ever. Had he even been at Little Bighorn that historic day? There was no note, no letter, just enough silver dollars in a cigar box to bury him in the Farnham Cemetery with his mysteries and full military honors. So that's the last poem I'm reading. We want to go to have some time for questions and answers. I'm going to thank everyone once again and turn it back to Lynn. I think we're going to put the link to purchasing the book. We're promoting Amazon here. The book is available in stores and Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. But just for convenience, we're going to put the Amazon purchase link here. But I want to thank everyone for coming here tonight and the panelists and Lynn for doing such a great job introducing this book for our folks. So thanks again.
Thank you, Bruce. That was really wonderful. And it's just really an eye opener. You know, the environments of the poems are very surprising many times. I did put the link to the Elk and the Glade in the chat column, and you know, the holidays are coming up, and I'm definitely giving my mom a copy of this book for Christmas, and you know, some other poets that I know in New York. So you know, you might want to do the same. We're going to open up now. We're going to close with a Q&A. If you want to ask a question, maybe just put a little note in the chat column, or use your raised hand. Where is it? There's a raised hand. Oh, thumbs up. That's not quite the same. Well, let's just say if you put any icon of on your screen, then I'll try to call on you, or just speak out. You know, if I miss it. You know, and you might want to, so you can ask questions now of Bruce Whitacre, our featured poet, or the artist Claudia Fitch, or Patricia Scarborough, or the museum director Crystal Werger. You know, you could ask any questions about writing, about family stories in your work, about the importance of place in your work or in art that you like, or anything related to today's program. And of course, if you live in Nebraska and you're part of the Jenny Hicks family and legacy, you might want to share your earliest memory of her or your thoughts on her impact in your family. Just, you know, I'm just throwing out some ideas there. Not that you need the prompts, but I'm just throwing them out there to jog something if you want. So does anyone have a question? No questions? Let's see. I wonder how to unmute everyone.
Myra just raised her hand, I think.
Okay, Myra Malkin, wonderful poet in New York. Myra Malkin. Yes, Myra.
I just wondered if somebody could say what some of the other subjects of her paintings were. I mean, the lion and the lioness are wonderful, and I don't have a notion of what she painted. Just, you know, just a brief glimpse at that.
I will try to get some other pictures up here for you. So just bear with me if you will.
Well, words are fine. I mean, you can
Almost all of her pictures, especially those that she sold from her home, were landscapes. And they were almost always mountainscapes, something sort of Colorado. Let me see if I can get this one up here. No, that didn't go.
Oh, you know, where's the link to the book that you sent me? Because I could just do screenshots.
Here it is. This is a picture my brother has. This is, I think, a pro forma of the kind of painting she was doing at the later phases of her career. She tended to paint animals earlier, the elk and the lions, and then she moved into landscapes.
I love that.
Yeah, she painted that for Esther. She painted 3 large, I call them daughter paintings, one for Ruth, one for Dorothy, one for Esther, and my brother Mark has this, and this is in the book. Thank you, Myra.
Thank you.
Kent, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I had a question more about, I guess, composition. When you go to write a poem, do you kind of have a story in mind, or you go through it several times and draw it out, or how do you work through your poetry?
Oh, it all depends. In this case, honestly, it sort of started with a list of memories and stories that I wanted eventually to treat. And I was just going through some notes the other day. The book is almost in the same order as those memories and stories. Some of them didn't make it into the book, but once I got on to Ruth and I wanted to get a story from her, there's a poem about Dorothy, which I felt completed the stories about the daughters. And then there were aspects of Jenny's life. I was especially interested in her trips back and forth to Cleveland and how she first started the idea of selling from her home. And there's a long poem in there about when she first started doing that, how that happened. So it was this, in this case, it was topical, but all sorts of things become subjects for poems. And I am really, really dependent upon prompts. Write a poem about a chimpanzee, write a poem about a chimpanzee on the streetcar. I'll take it, that I'm one of those who really responds very much to prompts, which a lot of my poet friends here, I'm sure, understand and sometimes work with as well. Does that help? This was really just getting through lists of memories to put together and then sorting out from there. But otherwise, I go through prompts mostly.
Thank you, Bruce. My wife, Teresa, wants to say something.
Hey, Teresa.
Just wanted to tell you, and I know I've told you before in a text, but I really, boy, I don't know why I'm getting, your words really made me feel what the story was. And I guess as a woman and an emotional feeler woman, I really appreciated that, because I'm also a reader and I love words. So the mix of the words and emotions and the feelings were great. So thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I think that's part of the gift of poetry, actually. This could have been a prose piece. It could have been a history. I've written a lot of plays drawing from this material, but somehow when I started doing it as poems, even though some of them were very narrative and very storytelling, the poetry really gave me the freedom to focus on those emotions. I think you picked up on what the gift to me was.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I would keep it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or observations or just random thoughts? You're in a safe place. So if you have that random thought, just you can, feel free to share it.
Bruce, I have a question about something we had talked about Jenny's paintings. And it was a story, just a little, I don't know, maybe not even a story, just a little funny bit about this being her first really gallery exhibit. She's never really shown her paintings, in this big of a grouping before, but you said something about a drugstore.
Yeah. Well, so I do know that Dorothy took her pictures to like a craft show in Holdridge, Nebraska, which is a town down the High Line. But yeah, one time in her diary, she writes about putting pictures in the drugstore window in Farnham. And they sold. Her pictures sold, by the way, for like $3, $4, $5, $10. So she got $10 from her pictures and went on to the dentist to have teeth pulled. And that's what she used the money for. So that was she lived in a small town that could just still deliver groceries and keep her going. But yeah, so this is Jenny's first ever museum show. And as far as I know, it's her first ever gallery show. And one of the things that I think is going to happen is that since she sold 1,000 pictures, and many of them went to neighbors and family and so forth, that there will be a lot of things surface. Already we've seen this happen with Crystal. The church in Farnham shows up and they have Jenny pictures. And I'm sure, Jen, you're going to have friends and family in the Lexington area who will show up with some. And so
that's what I'm hoping. I'm really hoping for that.
And so this show is drawn from pictures within the family. And a lot of members of the family have several of her pictures around, so there was a lot to choose from. But I'll be curious to see what other pictures are out there, because she often painted on commission. She often painted multiple sets of popular pictures. And so it'll be interesting to see some of the variety of things that are out there that we don't know about in the family.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really hoping that with some of the advertising that we're going to be doing for this, we're going to ask. We're just going to put the word out there and say, if anybody has, any paintings, let us know, bring them, show us, somehow let us know, because I'm sure she has a lot more out there than even the family's aware of.
I would be interested in knowing the dates of all the paintings, because it would be interesting to see if her work changed over the decades and how it changed. It would be really cool to know, like, what's the earliest painting you could find, too. I'd be really curious to see the earliest one that you could find.
Her first painting will be in the show.
Wow.
It's been identified, and Crystal has that. It's a painting of a sod house, so it is actually a Nebraska landscape. So.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay, well, I think we got all the questions. That was a good discussion. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and sharing your thoughts with the panelists and with Bruce. Maybe there are others in the audience who have family stories, after hearing the poems and seeing the paintings. Maybe you want to start doing some investigating. My mind is kind of racing right now. I'm thinking about the art, the chalk drawings, that I have, from a great aunt, and my mom's paintings. And, I think we might, it's going to trigger some investigations into our families. And of course, for women, it was unusual that she was painting. Most women artists of a certain generation and time poured their creativity and their talent into quilt making. And into the, into textile arts, and, we're really amazing in that way. So that's really an interesting thing to look at. So, I wanted to encourage you to write it, just start writing things down as they pop up for you, as you start to put these things together and remember things. And, there's links, again, I'll tell in the chat column, to buy the book, to contribute to the Dawson County Museum. And there's also, remember, going to be a recorded version of today's event on the Crown Rock Media website. Bruce, did I forget anything, or are we good? Is there anything else you would like to say?
I just want to say there is an in-person launch event November 29th at the Jefferson Market Library in Greenwich Village. Cindy Cathcart, a Nebraska native who is now with Condé Nast, will be hosting that. We'll be showing more slides and family photos and things like that there, but we'll have the book there. We'll do more readings. I'll be at Q and Willow, which is a store here in Queens, December 2nd. But the big news for everyone who's not from New York, I will be in Nebraska, April of 2023, and I'll be reading at the museum on April 13th. And we're trying to build a kind of family get-together from around the country there. And there'll be other appearances in Nebraska still underway, but I'll be in Nebraska most of April, spreading the word, and I've promised Patty a picnic, so yeah.
I was just thinking about that.
So those are the things in store, but I just can't thank everyone enough for being here, for your interest in Jenny and this story. And I hope that this is the start of a journey we can all take together. And as Lynn said, I think it really prompts us to think about our families and what brought us here, and the sort of talents that may or may not have had their full expression in their lifetimes. So
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening and great holidays.
It's so nice to see everyone. I hope I get to go to Nebraska someday.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great here.
I know.
Today is really great because the temperatures dropped 30 degrees.
Oh, one of those days. That's what keeps you young, right, Kent?
Yes.
All right. If anyone wants to stay on and chat, I will stop the recording and we can go from there. So let's see.